I was having coffee with a new intern the other day, young guy, sharp and incredibly ambitious. But there was something a bit off about him.
Off how?
Well, as he talked about his projects, he used this strange, almost like theatrical language. He wasn't talking about collaboration, not really.
Okay.
He's talking about how he was concealing his intentions from another department to, gain an advantage, and how he planned to court attention at all costs in the next big meeting.
Wow. Okay. Straight out of a playbook.
Totally. He had this little smirk like he was some grandmaster playing chess while the rest of us were just, playing checkers. It felt awkward.
I can imagine.
But what was really striking was how badly it was all backfiring on him. I mean, completely.
Oh, really? How so?
The senior managers he was trying so hard to impress, they just looked confused, mostly. And his own teammates, the people he actually needed to work with, were starting to avoid him.
So his attempts to project this image of power.
Yeah, they were just making him seem isolated and, frankly, untrustworthy.
Right. Not exactly the desired effect.
Not at all. Then, later that afternoon, I walked past his desk and saw it. The source of his entire persona.
Let me guess.
A well-worn copy of Robert Greene's The 48 Laws of Power. Dozens of pages bookmarked.
Yep, there it is.
And it suddenly clicked. He wasn't some budding Machiavelli, not really. He was just a kid following a recipe.
A dangerous recipe, it sounds like.
Exactly. Promising him a kingdom, but actually just teaching him how to burn every single bridge. And that's when I really started to wonder, what's wrong with this book? Why is everyone reading it? And why is it leading people so astray?
That anecdote, it perfectly captures what we need to dig into today for you. We're really analyzing the detrimental impact of these manipulative leadership strategies.
Strategies rooted in that classical Machiavellian thinking, right? The kind codified in those power guides.
Precisely. And how they affect things like organizational trust, employee retention, long-term innovation, especially in today's global companies.
Yeah.
The evidence we've seen really outlines why these methods are actively counterproductive. Frankly, they're dangerous in today's corporate world, which, increasingly relies on transparency and deep stakeholder trust.
Exactly. So our mission here is to understand why that playbook, the one from the, 16th century Italian diplomat, is actively failing the 21st century ambitious employee.
And what the alternative looks like. What modern, successful, sustainable leadership looks like instead.
Right. We're investigating the strategic advantages of actually cultivating transparency, fostering collaborative power dynamics, instead of that zero-sum game.
Because the evidence really suggests that for anyone aiming for long-term influence, real, lasting influence, character trumps cunning. Every time.
Okay, so let's dive into that. Let's unpack this Machiavellian core first, because it's more than just being a little sneaky, isn't it?
Oh, absolutely. When we talk about Machiavellianism in a modern organizational context, we're defining a very specific personality trait. It's characterized by highly exploitative behavior. Yeah, and often paired with this deep emotional coldness when interacting with others. The core belief is essentially that the ends always justify the means.
Especially if the means involve manipulation.
Exactly. Especially then.
It sounds fundamentally toxic. We associate it with the worst kind of corporate drama, the lying, the backstabbing, the dirty trick.
We do, but it's a real, measurable phenomenon. The research is quite clear on that.
And it gets linked to something broader, right? This dark triad.
It often does, yes.
Yeah.
It's important to grasp the full toxicity here. The triad consists of Machiavellianism, narcissism, the grandiosity and entitlement, and psychopathy, which involves the lack of empathy and impulsivity.
So where does Machiavellianism fit specifically?
Machiavellianism itself is really this strategic, calculated element within that triad. It's the manipulative planner, the one who uses other people purely as instruments, as tools for personal gain.
Without genuine emotion or remorse.
Correct. That emotional coldness is key.
Okay, but here's the question that always comes up. If these individuals are so strategically calculating, doesn't that calculation sometimes work? Doesn't it translate into effective, high-performing individuals, even if they, leave a trail of destruction behind them? Does ruthlessness at least get results?
That's the classic assumption, isn't it? That the ruthlessness pays off. But the consensus in organizational psychology is actually pretty damning.
How so?
Well, the short-term visibility of their wins, the things they've managed to grab credit for, it masks this deep underlying organizational decay. Machiavellian behavior is consistently correlated with several really detrimental organizational effects.
Okay, like what? What are the measurable outputs across the whole company when this behavior takes root?
First, you see a measurable drop in what researchers call organizational citizenship behavior, or OCB.
OCB, that's the helpful stuff, right? Going the extra mile.
Exactly. It's the voluntary work people do that goes above and beyond their minimum job requirements, helping a colleague out, volunteering for an extra project, showing loyalty, being a good corporate citizen.
And Machiavellianism kills that.
It actively extinguishes OCB because employees stop trusting that their extra effort will be recognized fairly. They start expecting exploitation instead. Why stick your neck out if you think someone's just going to take advantage?
So the organization loses its collective goodwill. Everyone just retreats into their own silo, sticking strictly to their job descriptions.
Precisely. And that leads directly to decreased job satisfaction across the board. Not just for the direct victims, the Machiavellian individual, but for everyone.
Because the environment itself becomes toxic.
Right. People hate working in an environment where they feel like they constantly have to watch their back. And guess who leaves first?
The good ones, the ethical ones.
Exactly. The most talented and ethical employees, the ones who actually value integrity, they leave, which leads to high turnover.
And for those who stay, now they're stuck in an environment where the company is losing its best talent. That sounds like a recipe for, well, chaos.
Chaos, definitely. And worse, increased counterproductive work behavior.
Meaning?
People who feel exploited or abused or just unfairly managed, they often retaliate. Maybe by actively sabotaging projects, maybe by cutting corners, maybe just by slacking off. The work environment becomes one of low productivity and really high internal friction.
So back to that idea of them being star performers. Is there any truth to it at all?
That's the critical point. The association between Machiavellianism and actual objective work performance is highly inconsistent in the research.
Really? Not consistently positive?
Not at all. Some studies report maybe a small positive association sometimes. Others find a negative effect. And many find just no significant relationship at all. It really seems the reputation for cunning often masks an extremely unstable pattern of behavior. That short-term manipulative win, like, say, stealing credit for someone else's project, is completely negated by the long-term organizational decay it causes.
It's just not sustainable.
It's a completely unsustainable model for success, especially in complex global operations today.
Okay, that makes perfect sense. Any success built on hiding mistakes or sabotaging others is just going to collapse eventually. But here's a scary thought. What happens when that Machiavellian individual stops being an ambitious intern and actually gains real organizational authority, a manager, a leader?
Ah, yes. This is where the dynamic becomes truly corrosive. When supervisors who score high in Machiavellianism perceive they have greater position power, meaning they feel secure, untouchable,
They feel like they can get away with more.
they're far more likely to get away with and frankly escalate toxic behavior. That perception of power strengthens the effect of abusive supervision on their teams. They feel, in a sense, licensed to manipulate and exploit, using their title as a shield.
That sounds like a horrifying feedback loop, especially if you have someone on the team who might also have those tendencies. Does that abusive culture then empower other potential abusers?
It absolutely does. There's research showing that when Machiavellian employees are subjected to abusive supervision, which, guess what, often originates from a Machiavellian leader,
They learn from the worst.
they are more likely to engage in unethical behavior themselves. The organizational climate set by that toxic leader essentially activates and reinforces the manipulative traits in the subordinates.
Wow.
The whole system starts to encourage and even reward misconduct. It creates this highly corrosive environment where, honestly, honesty itself can feel like a professional liability.
If the organization suffers, and it clearly does, the employees suffer even more deeply. Let's talk about that human cost. The research we looked at paints a very specific picture of the psychological damage, doesn't it? What's the pathway to basically destroying your staff's well-being?
Okay, yeah, this is where the analysis gets really crucial. The research, especially one study looking at professionals in high-stress places like hospitals, found a very specific and, frankly, highly efficient pathway leading to staff destruction. And that path starts with cynicism.
Organizational cynicism. What exactly does that mean in this context? Is it just complaining?
It's much deeper than just complaining about a bad policy. Organizational cynicism is this deep, corrosive belief that the organization itself lacks integrity, that it lacks ethical commitment or basic honesty.
So the employee fundamentally believes the company is corrupt or deceitful.
Or just acts purely in a self-serving manner, yeah. When leadership is characterized by that exploitation and emotional coldness we talked about, employees eventually realize they're just tools in someone else's political game. They stop believing in the mission, they stop believing the promises, they stop believing the stated values on the wall.
That belief acts like a kind of psychological acid, doesn't it? Just eating away at the foundation of the relationship between the worker and the employer.
That's a perfect analogy. Organizational cynicism functions as this core path, technically. It's called a mediator that just weakens the psychological contract.
The unwritten rules of mutual obligation.
Exactly. Why should an employee invest extra effort or loyalty or emotional energy if they fundamentally believe the company is dishonest and only out for itself? They essentially check out, mentally and emotionally. They prioritize self-preservation over any organizational goals.
And when they check out emotionally, that leads us to the final crippling result: burnout.
Precisely. Organizational cynicism is a proven mediator that directly drives emotional exhaustion. That's the key dimension of burnout.
Where does the exhaustion actually come from? Is it just being unhappy?
It comes from something very specific, what you might call vigilance fatigue. Imagine working for a leader you deeply distrust. You're constantly on guard, right?
Yeah, analyzing everything.
Analyzing every email for hidden meanings, questioning every directive, worrying about who might be manipulating whom, trying to make sure you're covered. That constant mental effort required to navigate a toxic environment, to perpetually watch your back, it's incredibly draining.
It creates chronic stress.
A state of chronic, sustained stress that just manifests as emotional exhaustion. Your batteries are just completely drained.
And we have some hard data on just how strong this relationship is. These aren't just vague feelings. The correlations are significant.
Indeed. The statistical correlations found in this research are really striking. Machiavellian leadership correlates highly with organizational cynicism. The correlation coefficient, R, is 0.56.
That's high.
Very high. It also correlates highly with emotional exhaustion, showing an R of 0.51. And finally, cynicism itself strongly correlates with emotional exhaustion at R equals 0.49.
Okay, those numbers are all substantial. For you listening, maybe you aren't a statistics expert, how should you interpret a correlation coefficient around 0.5? What does that really mean?
It means the relationship is strong and highly significant. It tells us these things aren't happening independently. They're deeply intertwined. When Machiavellian leadership goes up, cynicism doesn't just nudge up a little bit, it skyrockets.
And high cynicism leads directly to
high emotional exhaustion. When cynicism is high, the emotional batteries of the staff are draining at an alarmingly fast rate. This isn't just a morale problem.
No.
It's a measurable threat to the cognitive and emotional well-being of the entire workforce. This is basically a recipe for a high-turnover, low-performing ghost ship, incapable of long-term innovation, incapable of resilience in the global market. It's a dead end.
Okay, so we've clearly established the catastrophic failure of the Machiavellian approach. It destroys trust, poisons the culture, drives good people to burnout. Now, let's pivot. Let's look at the strategic counterpoint, the transparent leader. The definition here seems almost absolute.
It really is. A transparent leader operates on this core principle. They must do business as if everything they say or do will end up on the front page of the local newspaper.
That's a high bar.
It is, and it demands proactive, deliberate integrity because it recognizes a fundamental truth about today's hyper-connected digital world. Concealment is temporary. It just is. And trust is the ultimate non-replicable business asset.
If information exists, it's probably going to surface eventually.
Right, so the only truly strategic decision is to manage the information openly from the very start. Let's look at the first principle required to achieve this: telling the whole truth.
And this isn't just about avoiding outright lies, is it? It's more than that.
Much more. It's about providing complete, context-rich information, even if that information is painful or strategically difficult to share at that moment.
No spin.
No spin. And furthermore, for a truly transparent leader, ignorance is not an excuse. You can't just plead innocence later if you failed to communicate a critical truth because you didn't bother to find it out.
So you have to know your business.
You have to know your business inside and out. Be accountable for the facts before you communicate them, whether it's to employees, shareholders, or customers. You must actively seek out the truth before speaking.
That idea of proactively seeking the truth, it makes me think of those deceptive accounting practices some companies used to use to kind of temporarily inflate their success.
Yes, absolutely. A classic example is channel stuffing.
Right. Explain that quickly.
Channel stuffing is when a company pushes way more inventory onto its distributors or retailers than they can actually sell, usually right at the end of a quarter. They record those shipments as sales to artificially boost their quarterly revenue numbers.
Even though the product is just sitting in a warehouse somewhere.
Exactly. It hasn't actually sold through to the end consumer. It's basically financial manipulation disguised as good performance.
And to rebuild credibility after something like that, the transparency had to be radical, right?
Absolutely radical. In the case of companies trying to recover from that, like Dial back in the day, the leadership had to start telling the whole truth. That meant openly admitting the prior deceptive practices.
Owning it.
Owning it completely. And then, crucially, regularly reporting detailed metrics, like a cross-section of average quarterly customer warehouse inventories, to the board and the investment community. They had to keep reporting that until those inventory levels returned to normal.
That sounds painful.
It was painful, granular honesty. But it was the primary goal in turning the company around and rebuilding that shattered investor trust.
Okay, so that sets the standard for financial truth-telling. Let's move to the second pillar you mentioned, building a values-based culture. This feels like the difference between just having rules posted on a wall and actually having a deeply shared belief system.
Exactly. And this is not a fast process, which is why, frankly, Machiavellians don't bother with it. It takes immense patience. It requires consistent, ongoing communication of a clear cultural contract.
The cultural contract.
Yeah, a shared value system that defines how the company actually operates day in and day out. The goal is to embed integrity, accountability, and openness so deeply into the organizational DNA that it prevents those toxic pockets of exclusion, where bad behavior festers.
And it eliminates nasty surprises like finding out about abusive managers too late.
Precisely. And to make that culture real, the transparent leader absolutely must lead by example. They have to break down the traditional hierarchy, be physically and psychologically accessible.
That accessibility piece seems critical in the modern environment.
It's non-negotiable. Transparent leaders have to tear down that ivory tower mentality that shields executives from reality. Our findings emphasize that leaders should ensure their office is located on the same floor as other employees.
Walk the halls.
Actively walk the halls, yes, and be digitally available. Critically, they should be answering every employee email personally.
Okay, hold on. Answering every single email, even from the most junior employee, isn't that just wildly inefficient for a CEO?
It might seem inefficient on the surface, but it's actually the highest expression of efficiency when it comes to building and maintaining trust. Think about it.
Okay.
If leaders only listen to filtered information that travels up through layers of management, what do they get?
Sanitized versions. Good news only.
Distorted, sanitized versions of reality, exactly. Managers often spin bad news or hide problems to make themselves look good. By answering emails directly and physically getting into the trenches, leaders bypass all those filtering mechanisms. They listen directly to the frontline reality.
So they actually know what's going on.
Which prevents disasters. And it ensures the leader is accountable for the actual health of the organization, not just the rosy picture in the management reports.
We found a great anecdote that illustrates this principle perfectly, taking that accessibility and employee respect seriously, even for seemingly trivial things.
Right. This involves the CEO of Dial again, who had actively encouraged employees at all levels to email him directly about anything on their minds. Anything at all.
And he got an unusual one.
He received an email from an employee at a soap plant in Illinois, a long-time valued employee, complaining not about pay or benefits or anything major, but about a dead bird carcass lying outside the plant.
A dead bird.
Yeah, raising immediate health and sanitation concerns for that specific location.
Okay, most executives would just forward that to facilities or HR, maybe ignore it entirely as too minor for their attention.
But this CEO understood the underlying principle. The issue itself, the dead bird, was physically minor, yes, but the complaint was significant. Why? Because it represented an employee trusting the system, voicing a concern within that cultural contract they'd tried to build.
So he took it seriously.
He took it very seriously, immediately verified the complaint, and had the carcass cleared away within the hour. The point wasn't the bird. The point was protecting the asset, which was the employee's peace of mind and their trust in the open door policy.
That immediate action sends a powerful message.
A huge message. It demonstrated that all concerns, regardless of subject matter, would be met with speed and seriousness. That reinforced the open door policy and built incredibly deep, lasting trust far more effectively than any memo could. Now that we've laid out these principles of transparency, let's look at some real-world examples. Cases where leaders either chose that path of deep character and integrity or opted for short-term concealment and the consequences.
Right. The consequences really define their legacy and their brand's resilience. We should start with a classic case of how concealment can just totally undo even necessary business decisions. Former American Airlines CEO Don Carty.
Right. Carty had achieved something almost impossible back in 2003. This was right after the severe downturn following 9/11, a terrible time for airlines.
They were bleeding money.
Losing $5 million a day. Carty managed to negotiate $1.8 billion in wage concessions from all the major unions, pilots, attendants, mechanics. A huge ask.
He convinced them to take pay freezes, deep cuts.
Yes, to stave off what seemed like inevitable bankruptcy. And he led by example, seemingly. He took a pay freeze himself, announced he'd cut his own salary by a third.
So he'd built up immense goodwill, right? Trust through shared sacrifice. But then the concealment, it just destroyed everything almost instantly.
Almost instantly is right. The concessions were secured in mid-April, very shortly after an SEC filing that's a public disclosure required by the government revealed something hidden.
What was it?
The airline had secretly funded supplemental pension trusts for 45 top executives. These trusts were designed to protect their benefits in case the company went bankrupt.
While asking everyone else to sacrifice.
Exactly. And worse, they had offered 6 senior executives, including Carty himself, lucrative retention bonuses equal to twice their base salaries.
And none of this was mentioned during the union negotiations.
This entire arrangement had been kept completely hidden from the unions during that incredibly painful negotiation phase.
That is the absolute definition of Machiavellianism in practice, isn't it? Ask others to sacrifice everything while secretly protecting yourself and your inner circle.
Textbook. And even if you could argue those bonuses were somehow legally justifiable as retention tools for key execs, the timing, and crucially the secrecy, were the career-defining error.
The concealment was the poison pill.
It was the corporate suicide button. Even though a company spokesman later tried to defend the measures, claiming they were similar to safeguards for pilots' pensions, it didn't matter. The fundamental lack of openness enraged the unions.
Understandably.
They immediately demanded Carty's resignation. Shares of AMR, the parent company, plummeted. All that political capital he'd built. Gone overnight, the board swiftly voted him out the following week.
It's such a clear lesson. In today's transparent economy, hiding critical compensation details from key stakeholders, especially stakeholders who just sacrificed their livelihood for you, it's an act of self-immolation. You just can't do it.
You really can't. Now, let's look at the absolute antithesis of that, the courage of character shown by Colgate-Palmolive CEO Reuben Mark. This is about choosing integrity over a massive, massive competitive win.
Okay, this sounds like a good one.
It's a truly remarkable story because it really showcases character in a moment of extreme temptation. So Mark, whose company Colgate competes fiercely with rivals like Dial, receives this shocking communication.
What happened?
A former employee of a competitor we believe was Dial, who's now working as a Colgate salesperson, handed over that competitor's highly confidential, complete marketing plan on a CD.
Wow. The keys to the kingdom, basically, delivered straight to his desk.
A massive competitive edge. Proprietary information that could potentially be leveraged to crush the competition in the next quarter. What do you think he did?
Based on what we've been discussing, he didn't use it.
He called his competitor's CEO immediately, the leader of Dial. He informed them straight up about the security breach. He stated explicitly, "I'm not going to look at this information and I'm sending it back to you right now."
No hesitation.
No hesitation. He handled the breach internally, fired the Colgate salesperson who brought him the CD, and chose not to gain an unfair competitive advantage, even though he could have easily hidden the source and used that knowledge strategically.
He actively refused to play the Machiavellian game, even when it was handed to him on a silver platter.
Exactly. Reuben Mark demonstrated that he didn't need cunning or insider manipulation to succeed. He chose principled behavior, knowing, and this is key, that the long-term integrity of the Colgate brand and his own personal reputation were infinitely more valuable than any short-term boost in market share.
That level of character adhesion, that commitment to principles, that's the bedrock of sustainable success and brand resilience, isn't it?
It truly is. Now, on the flip side of concealment and courage, we have a third danger: the financial fallout that comes from denial. Lucent provides a stark example here.
Lucent Technologies, what happened there?
Lucent faced a major crisis when it had to admit it had overstated its quarterly revenues by nearly $700 million. A catastrophic accounting error.
Ouch. That's huge.
Huge. Now, CEO Rich McGinn failed the transparency test here, not necessarily by being secretive initially about the error itself, but by entering a state of complete denial once the crisis hit.
How so? Denial in what way?
He started blaming external factors, blaming others within the organization for the company's poor performance. He refused to address the fundamental issue openly and crucially, accountably.
He didn't own it.
He didn't own it. And that failure to address the company's health with radical transparency, that denial, led directly to him being voted out by the board. Denial is lethal for a public company because it signals a complete lack of control and zero accountability. Inventors flee.
Okay, and finally, the ultimate case study. The one often held up in crisis management and total disclosure. The one that really set the modern standard for rebuilding trust. Johnson & Johnson and the Tylenol crisis.
Ah, yes, 1982. J&J faced an absolute nightmare scenario. 7 people in the Chicago area died after taking extra-strength Tylenol capsules. An unknown suspect had deliberately laced them with cyanide.
Unimaginable.
Unimaginable. Tylenol's market share instantly cratered, dropping from 37% down to a devastating 7%.
Yeah.
This was an existential threat to one of the world's most trusted consumer brands.
So what did they do? They didn't try to minimize the danger or conceal information or claim it was just a localized Chicago problem, did they?
No, they did the exact opposite. They chose total disclosure, total transparency immediately.
How did that look in practice?
They confronted the crisis head-on. J&J executives assumed complete responsibility for the consumer relationship. They went public immediately, warning everyone, everywhere, about the potential danger of consuming any Tylenol capsules.
They took the hit nationally.
They made the incredibly costly but proactive decision to immediately recall 30 million bottles of Tylenol from shelves across the country. That was a financial loss exceeding $100 million back in 1982 dollars.
Even though they weren't actually responsible for the tampering itself.
Exactly. They weren't legally liable for the crime, but they took responsibility for consumer safety. They publicly cooperated fully with the FBI and the FDA, sharing every single piece of information they had. No holding back.
And the result? What was the outcome of that extreme honesty and proactive responsibility?
That swift action and total transparency worked. It restored consumer confidence much faster than anyone predicted was possible.
Really? After people died?
Yes. When J&J reintroduced Tylenol, they focused entirely on safety. They pioneered the industry-wide adoption of the triple seal tamper-resistant packaging that we all now take for granted on medication bottles.
They set the new standard.
They did. Their transparent management during that horrific crisis earned them far greater public respect in the long run, protected their brand reputation, and ultimately allowed Tylenol to regain its position as the leading pain reliever. They proved, definitively, that integrity is the single most powerful crisis management tool available.
These case studies really drive home that transparency isn't just, an ethical luxury or some kind of moral mandate. It seems like a necessary component of sustainable business success, especially for brand resilience in the modern age.
Absolutely. And this brings us nicely to the evolution of business value itself.
Right. Traditionally, business focused almost solely on economic objectives, didn't it? Profit was king. That was the only measure that really mattered.
And that thinking fueled the idea that ruthless, Machiavellian tactics were acceptable, maybe even necessary, if they deliver those quarterly returns.
But that model is just unsustainable now, isn't it? And frankly, outdated.
Completely outdated. Modern business practice requires the integration of social, environmental, and economic considerations, what we commonly call corporate social responsibility, or CSR. It has to be woven into the firm's daily operations and all its stakeholder interactions.
Businesses today have to justify their existence not just to shareholders, but to society as a whole.
Precisely. And to successfully implement and maintain that kind of culture, a culture of genuine sustainability and responsibility, you need a fundamentally different kind of leader than the Machiavellian manipulator.
And that's where the concept of transformational leadership comes into play, right?
Exactly. Transformational leadership, or TL, is seen as essential for promoting this sustainable culture. It involves leaders who do specific things.
Like what?
They articulate shared future visions that inspire people. They encourage intellectual followers to challenge the status quo, to think differently. And, crucially, they consciously reinforce ethics and values throughout the entire workforce, mainly through their own role modeling.
So that ethical perspective, that dedication to shared values, is fundamental for achieving high corporate social responsibility performance, or CSRP.
It's considered a fundamental prerequisite. Does the data actually support this link? This connection between inspirational, ethical leadership and a company's genuine ability to do good.
Yeah, what does the research show?
It shows a significant positive correlation, specifically between transformational leadership and corporate social responsibility performance. The correlation coefficient R is 0.356.
Okay, 0.356. So meaningful.
It means TL plays a vital and statistically significant role in getting these complex, long-term ethical initiatives off the ground and keeping them going. The leader really has to set that aspirational bar.
But a leader, even a truly transformational one, is still just one piece of the puzzle, right? The entire organizational environment, the culture has to buy into these values. Otherwise, the leader's vision just remains, well, words on paper.
You're absolutely right. And when we examine the mechanisms that truly drive CSRP, guess what emerges as an even stronger, more potent predictor than leadership style alone?
Let me guess. The culture.
Organizational culture, OC. Measured by factors like internal harmony, a sense of social responsibility, support for innovation. That culture is highly correlated with CSRP. In fact, it boasts an incredibly strong coefficient of R equals 0.774.
0.74. That is massive. How should we interpret the sheer magnitude of that finding for you listening? That seems huge.
To put that number in perspective, a correlation that strong means that the shared values and the daily behavioral norms of the culture, they aren't just a factor. They are arguably the single most powerful predictor of ethical behavior and social responsibility performance.
More powerful than the leader.
Far outpacing the leader's individual influence alone, statistically speaking. The leader might create the fertile soil, but the culture is like the redwood that grows from it. If the organizational culture genuinely values transparency and ethics, then CSR performance is almost guaranteed to be high, regardless of temporary market pressures or who's in the corner office at that moment.
Okay, and here is the million-dollar question. The one that really debunks the entire Machiavellian premise. Does doing the right thing, does having high CSRP actually translate into better financial results? Or is it just a cost center, a nice-to-have that drains profits?
It translates directly. Critically, corporate social responsibility performance is positively correlated with financial performance. The measured correlation is R versus 0.348.
Okay, so another significant positive link.
Yes, and this provides a powerful data-backed argument. Operating with high ethics, radical transparency, and a commitment to social responsibility is a measurable driver of sustainable financial health. It contributes to long-term competitiveness in a world that increasingly values purpose alongside profit.
So that correlation tells us that transparency and integrity aren't just side projects or PR exercises. They are actual competitive advantages. Can we point to a company we discussed that really embodies this long-term high-integrity approach and reaped the financial rewards?
Colgate-Palmolive, the company led by Reuben Mark, whom we discussed earlier. It stands out as a prime example. Remember, he prioritized integrity over that huge competitive gain.
Right.
Well, under his leadership, the company saw remarkable sustained success. We're talking about 12.8% annual earnings growth over an 18-year period. That's incredible consistency.
And you're saying that's connected to their ethics?
It's widely believed to be directly connected to the company's very comprehensive 18-page corporate code of conduct. This isn't just a document. It's a system they live by, emphasizing ethics, honesty, and trust. They prioritize integrity not only in customer relations, but crucially, internally as well.
And that philosophy shows up on the bottom line.
It shows up directly in their sustained financial performance and their powerful brand resilience over decades. They really proved that building a strong, ethical culture isn't just the right thing to do. It's the smart path to long-term profitability and market leadership.
So we've really journeyed from that ambitious, maybe misguided intern reading a 16th century power manual all the way up to the C-suite making these huge multi-million-dollar decisions based on corporate integrity.
Yeah.
And we've synthesized this core contrast, haven't we? The destructive, ultimately hollow, short-term gains promised by Machiavellianism versus the long-term, sustainable competitive advantage that's secured through genuine integrity and transparency.
That's the crux of it. Machiavellianism, especially in the contemporary organization, leads almost inevitably down a path to organizational cynicism, widespread emotional exhaustion, high turnover, and just fundamental instability.
It prioritizes cunning, manipulation,
Right, and those are inherently unsustainable tactics in today's transparent global economy. Consumers, employees, investors, they demand accountability and authenticity now more than ever. The cost of concealment, as Don Carty found out, is simply too high.
And conversely, what we see with leaders who actively reject that toxic playbook, leaders who embrace radical transparency, like J&J did during the Tylenol crisis, or like Colgate-Palmolive does in its daily competitive approach.
What we see is that their integrity becomes a strategic, non-replicable asset. It drives both employee morale, engagement, and measurable financial performance. They build resilient organizations, the kind that can actually withstand market shocks and adapt over the long haul.
So the new standard for influence, for real power in today's world, it really requires character, not cunning.
Absolutely. Knowledge of Machiavellianism might serve a purpose, maybe as a necessary defense mechanism, a way for you to spot and perhaps defend yourself against toxic behavior in others.
Know thine enemy, sort of.
Maybe. But adopting it as a personal strategy for success, that's just completely outdated and ultimately self-defeating in the modern context. Sustainable success today really is the end result of an ethical organization.
An organization focused on what?
One that focuses on genuinely anticipating consumer needs and providing outstanding service. And that kind of service only comes from a culture of openness, shared values, and deep trust. It's about building a foundation where every single employee feels valued enough to contribute their best work, their creativity, their loyalty.
Character over credentials, maybe. Or at least character as a core credential. That really feels like the defining lesson from this deep dive into the modern power dynamic.